Well, thank you for staying with us. It's still your business, Nigeria. Well, during the week, I had a one-on-one conversation with the founder and chief executive of the Networking Institute, Mr. Kingsley Aikins, on how well to engage diasporans, Nigerians inclusive, and how to attract investments into the country. This is key at this time following President Bola Tinubu's drive at improving revenue generation from every angle. Well, take a listen and enjoy the interview. Welcome to this segment of Business Nigeria, where I'll be having a special interview with the founder of the Networking Institute. We're lucky to have him here in Nigeria, Mr. Kingsley Aikins, to be speaking to us on Business Nigeria on some issues around diaspora issues and all that has to do with, of course, one way or the other, getting foreign direct investment into our country, something like that. But thank you so much, Kingsley. It's good to have you join us here live in the studio.
Thank you for inviting me. And I have to say, this is my first visit to Nigeria.
Wow, great stuff. And how has it been? Africa's most populous nation.
It's fantastic. I mean, it's been a real eye-opener for me. I've been to a series of African countries. I've been to 40 countries around the world, but never in Nigeria. But I know lots of Nigerians because you have a phenomenal diaspora around the world. So I've met Nigerians in all sorts of positions. And also in Ireland, we have a terrific network of Nigerians. I was just saying on the way here that the two fastest people in Ireland in athletics, the 100 meters, are actually a Nigerian man and a Nigerian woman who were born in Ireland, live there, but you're part of your diaspora.
Wow, great stuff. Now, you say that diaspora matters now more than ever. Tell us more. Why is that?
Well, I think a few reasons. Firstly, you know, in the year 1990, 150 million people lived outside the country they were born in. That number today is 281 million. If it were a country, it'd be the 5th largest country in the world. And so what you have now, because of technology and communications, we can now connect with these people, like instantaneously, constantly, intensively, whereas historically, we couldn't. Historically, when you left your country, you were gone, and you were gone for good. We used to say absence equals exile. But now, actually, you can leave this country, you can leave Nigeria, but you can stay constantly involved. You can watch your TV station every day of the week. You can go online and find out what's happening. So that's introduced a new dynamic into the relationships that exist internationally. I think Nigeria has a phenomenal global network. And it's important now that you access that, you engage that, you involve that, and suddenly it gives you access to people and money and resources all around the world. So you have such a thing, we call it Diaspora Capital. Countries have it, cities have it, regions have it, institutions have it, like universities, sports teams have it, but it's global. And that's new, because technology and communications are making all this possible. Does that make sense?
Really, it does. It does. Technology everywhere now. But in what ways can Nigeria diaspora now, or Nigerian diaspora help Nigeria?
Well, think about that notion of diaspora capital. It's actually made up of 3 flows. Okay. Flows of people, flows of knowledge, and flows of money, of finance. And of course, historically, countries like Nigeria were always attracting a lot of remittances. You know, people sending money back home. And that was always the way it was in the past. But now, your diaspora, who are successful and are doing extraordinary things, they can be a source of not just money, but they can be a source of contacts. They can be a source of IP, intelligence. They're doing extraordinary things in extraordinary countries and cities around the world. So we say that what were once lost actors can now be national assets. You know, you now have. Sometimes I remember when I was working for NIDO, they said, our diaspora is Nigeria's new oil. I thought that was a nice concept, you know, because a number of countries have been doing this for a long period of time. I actually think the countries best to look at are I call them the 3 I's, Israel, India, and Ireland. The 3 I's have been doing this for a long, long time. Now there's over 100 countries trying to figure out. And the notion of diaspora capital, it means, you know, that could be to do with education, it could be to do with culture, could be to do with sport, could be to do with investment, could be to do with export promotion, it could be to do with volunteering and mentoring. It certainly could be to do with philanthropy and contributing, resources back to Nigeria.
Let's stay more on the Diaspora Capital. Tell us more about this. What clearly do you mean about that?
Okay, so, I think as I said earlier, when people were gone, they were gone forever. If you went to Southern California, that's who you were. But actually now you can live in Southern California, but you can be very involved back to your country of origin or ancestry or even affinity. So you can be very involved back to Ireland or Poland or Peru or whatever the country is. And you don't necessarily have to return to those countries to be very engaged in those countries. So I think that's the benefit of this technology and communications, and everything to do with high tech is allowing you to engage instantaneously. And now countries are realizing we have a resource. But to benefit from that resource, we've got to do a few things. So we've got to invest in our structures. We've got to help these organizations grow internationally. We've got to put time and money and people aside for this. We've got to use our embassies, our consulates. We've got to train our people how to engage with these people. We've got to listen to the diaspora, because, people, when they've lived away for quite a long time, they become a bit different. They have a different way of living, a different way of using their resources, etc. So I think it's very important that you listen to your diaspora, you learn from them, you deal with the issues that they bring up, because they will bring up issues which concern them. They expect, in many cases, to have the same sort of standards and values in the country that they've come from as in the country that they now live in. But they do bring special things in terms of their expertise and their knowledge, the contacts that they have internationally, the resources that they can bring.
You've been involved with a series of engaging diasporans all across the world. Of course, like you say, you've traveled almost everywhere. Now, can you tell us some of the lessons you've learned, going all around?
So the reason I got involved in this is I actually worked for the main Irish diaspora organization called the Ireland Funds, based in the United States. So here's the bad news. 10 million people in history have left Ireland. Here's the good news. 10 million people in history have left Ireland, because we now have an empire which was not built by military might or force of arms. It was built by the fact that so many people went to so many countries over many centuries. So countries now realize we have something special here. And people have a great desire to belong. They want to belong either to a country or sometimes not a country, sometimes a place, sometimes as a city or a town. I did a project for the city of Copenhagen a few years ago, the Copenhagen diaspora. So it's a city diaspora. But it all comes back to that sense of belonging. And we all want to belong. We want to belong to a place. We want to belong to a culture. We want to belong to maybe a university or a company even. Like the company in the world that have done an amazing job on building their diaspora is McKinsey, which is a great consulting company. Yes. Now, McKinsey have 30,000 people who used to work for McKinsey. They've left. But McKinsey have a thing called the Global McKinsey Network, which they've got an executive and a team in Boston who run this. And they have built a network of former McKinsey people around the world. They keep in touch with them. They hold events for them. They tell everybody where everybody else has moved. And guess what? These people refer business back to McKinsey. So companies now are interested in this. Universities have always been interested in this. They actually don't call it diaspora. They call it alumni. But universities, and people are very loyal to their university. I'm very loyal to the university I went to, still very engaged with it. And that's the fascinating thing. And again, because technology is allowing you to make these connections, and people are living, sometimes we call it hyphenated lives. They're Californian and Greek, they're Canadian and Scottish, they're Australian and Greek, And they can be both. In the old days, you had to be one or the other, but now you can be both. And that's kind of an exciting possibility.
Mm-hmm. Now, you say that the key to diaspora engagement is networking. Can you tell us more about this and how well networking has helped to strengthen ties among diaspora?
So I'm a big fan of the notion of networking. And here's what's interesting. Most everybody I talk to says absolutely it's critically important, networking. But schools don't teach it. Colleges don't teach it. Universities don't teach it. You see, if you go to a school or college, your progress is determined by a grade, a score, a metric. It's a mark. It's got nothing to do with the person sitting beside you. Then you get into the real world of work. It's got everything to do with the people around you. You know? But we don't, it's this, what, if you like, you call it a soft skill in many ways. All these institutions are about knowledge. They're about hard skills. And you have to have them. But actually, life is more about, skills, soft skills. And those soft skills of communicating, connecting, collaborating, not taught. So where are you going to learn these things? And the challenge now is that the next generation coming through are completely spending their lives on screens, and they're spending their lives on devices. And they actually are quite weak in that soft skill area. So universities are now rethinking what's the product we want to deliver at the end of the 4 years in university. And they're thinking more and more is that not only do we need knowledge, but we need skills. Knowledge you can access. I mean, you can find out, ChatGPT and all these things that are happening. We can all find knowledge. But skills, you can't go online and just suddenly get a skill. So networking, I think, is fundamental in all of this. I worked in 6 countries around the world. And in some of them I went to, I didn't know a single person. And I realized to survive and thrive, I needed to build strong and diverse networks. That was the thing that was actually critical. The number one predictor of career success, all the research shows, is to be in an open network, not a closed network. And a closed network would be if you had told you had a party and you invited all your friends and they all know each other. That's a closed network. An open network is where there's a whole diverse group of people.
People come in and they get to
mix up all sorts of different people from different places. I always say, your network is like an orchestra, and you're the conductor. We have attracted into Ireland some of the smartest people particularly from around the EU, from around Europe. So these young people, and they work for Google and LinkedIn and Facebook and Microsoft and IBM. Big tech kind of stuff is going on there. And the diaspora is often very important in that because they can encourage this kind of inward investment we have. We call it FDI, foreign direct investment. And our diaspora have always played a role in making introductions, making suggestions, giving advice, giving tips, giving gossip, all these things that make up how you make a decision. A lot of that information comes from our diaspora.
Brilliant stuff. Let's looking at the crystal ball now. Let me ask that: how do you see Nigerian diaspora engagement evolve? Of course, maybe next 5 years.
Yeah, I think it's only going to soar. I think it's going to soar for Nigeria because you have a really, really talented and smart and educated diaspora around the world. And I often say, look at what other countries are doing. And I actually think the country that might be of most interest for Nigeria is to look at what India has done. Indians are now some of the great CEOs of the great companies of the world, particularly in the area of tech. But that's all been quite recent. What we're talking about is from about the 1990s on, Indians began to move to do their elite education, their PhDs and MBAs in the United States. There's 18 million Indians live outside of India, and India is completely connected with them, but not historically. Historically, there wasn't a connection. In fact, there was a bad connection between the diaspora and India. And in 2002, Manmohan Singh, who was the Prime Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, he instituted a high-level commission of the Indian diaspora to research the Indian diaspora. They spent 2 years talking to the Indian diaspora. And the Indian diaspora said, we're not connected with you because it's quite corrupt in India. It's also very bureaucratic. There's licensing laws and all that. And they wrote a report. You can read it. It's 700 pages. It's online. Wow. The high-level commission of the Indian diaspora. But it's fascinating. And India brought in some changes. They changed all those rules for restrictions on licensing. They got rid of all of that. They got rid of the rules against it in buying property and shares. They introduced a new passport, the OCI, the Overseas Citizen of India. They started a conference every year in January, 3,000 Indian CEOs from around the world come back to India. They started a Know India program for young people to learn about India, the people in the diaspora. And what they began to do was to create a brand of global Indianness, which was all about technology, all about, you know, being smart, highly educated. They're highly educated. Education was the key. Coming through the IITs, the Indian technological colleges. And what began to emerge then, I used to call them Indian business rock stars, heads of the major companies. So I'll give you an example. Indra Nooyi, a woman from Chennai in India, born and educated there, very modest background, but smart, got to college, university, got to America, joined a consulting company after she did her PhD. And the consulting company had a client called Pepsi, and they hired her, and she became head of Pepsi. A woman from India, CEO of Pepsi. But that's not what's interesting. What's interesting is that she became head of the US-India Business Council, and she started promoting US investment back into India. Mukhtar Kent, CEO of Coca-Cola, he was head of the US-Turkish Business Council, bringing investment back into Turkey. You had Andrew Liveris, head of Dow Chemicals, but he was head of the US-Greek Business Council. So he was bringing investment back into Greece from the US. You had Craig Barrett, was the head of Intel, the great computer chip company. He was head of the Irish Technology Leadership Group, encouraging Silicon Valley tech companies to have operations in Ireland. So I think you have now this A&I network of Nigerians in your diaspora who are in a position to do that sort of stuff, and some of it's happening. So I think you have an asset there. And I think the important thing is to put in place strategies and policies at a government level, at a regional level, that incentivize and encourages that kind of activity to happen.
Interesting stuff. Now, well, I always like to ask if there are challenges in all of this, because it sounds interesting, but one or two challenges you faced in, you know, moving around and getting diasporans together. Can you tell us some of it? Has it been all smooth?
I have to. Look, I'll be honest with you. I put out a publication last year entitled "Why Diaspora Initiatives Fail," right? And there's 25 reasons why they fail, and it's become one of my most popular publications. But it's because you often learn more from your failures than from your successes. And one of them is I call it fuzzy math. I think we've a tendency to say, okay, so there's 2 million in the Jamaican diaspora. If every one of them gives $10 a month to create jobs in Jamaica, we'll solve unemployment. But, you know, life's not like that. It just doesn't work like that. I think, secondly, a lot of diaspora initiatives are like fireworks. They start with great enthusiasm and then they kind of die, mainly because they run out of money, you know, and the organizations who are carrying them out maybe aren't good enough. So that's a kind of another negative. Diaspora organizations often fight and dispute and row and you know, but that's kind of human nature. There's nothing particular to Nigeria or Ireland about that. That kind of happens. I see it happening all over the world. And so there are a few reasons why these diaspora initiatives don't work. I think it's important that it's a whole of government approach to this, not just foreign affairs, but they're very important because they have the distribution network, but the whole of government have to get engaged. I think it's important that you think about what is the role of government on diaspora engagement. Is it to be a sort of implementer of all these programs, or is it to be a facilitator? And a facilitation is generally better. In other words, government have a role to create what we call the enabling conditions, to allow lots of organizations to flourish. Some will succeed, some won't succeed. We had an expression, let 1,000 flowers bloom. And some of them will kind of soar and some of them will fall away. But the net effect will be pretty positive. I think it's important that in your diaspora you not only seek out the most successful, but you also look after the vulnerable, you know. People, Nigerians in the diaspora who may need some help and support. I think it's important that you get both those things correct. So there are just a few of the kind of tips, if you like, that I think are important to look out for.
Well, it's a good way to wrap it up. I must thank you so much, Kingsley Aikins. It's been interesting talking to you on this segment of Business Nigeria. Like I said earlier, Kingsley Aikins is the founder of the Networking Institute.